Maya Chen never expected to hold the deed to a mansion, not when her bank account showed exactly $1,347. Not when she was working double shifts at Rosie's Diner just to keep a roof over her and Leo's head. But there it sat in the county clerk's office, legal and official, waiting for a signature that felt more like surrender than hope. The building inspector had warned her not to go inside alone. The real estate agent had laughed when she signed the preliminary papers. The town whispered that only a fool or someone truly desperate would take on a property this cursed. Maya was both. And what she would find in the shadows of that crumbling estate wasn't just dust and decay. It was a secret from a vanished genius, Dr. Thomas Blackwood, who had hidden a world-changing invention in the walls, beneath the floors, scattered through the darkness like breadcrumbs for whoever cared enough to follow. A device that could generate clean energy from nothing. A discovery that powerful people had tried to bury 33 years ago. But that morning, standing in the courthouse hallway with Leo's small hand in hers, Maya knew none of this. She only knew that the eviction notice taped to her apartment door gave her 72 hours. 72 hours to find a miracle or start sleeping in her car. Her son deserved better than the cramped room above Miller's Hardware, where the walls were so thin they could hear every slurred argument from the neighbor who reminded Leo too much of his father. The notice appeared on a corkboard between flyers for lost cats and estate sales. Most people walked right past it. Maya almost did too. She had come to pay a parking ticket she couldn't afford, holding Leo's hand as they navigated fluorescent-lit hallways that smelled of old paper and institutional coffee. But something made her stop. Maybe the bold print at the top, property sale, dollar. Maybe desperation sharpening her vision to see opportunities in places others saw only trash. The paper was yellowed at the edges as if it had hung there for months, ignored by everyone except the spiders building webs in the corner. The property was described as a single-family residence built in 1983, located at 427 Blackwood Lane on the eastern edge of Millbrook, Pennsylvania. The address meant nothing to Maya. She'd only lived in this small town for 8 months, ever since she'd fled Marcus with nothing but 2 suitcases and an 8-year-old who had seen too much. The listing included a grainy photocopy of the house, barely visible through the poor print quality. Maya could make out tall windows, a peaked roof, what looked like a circular driveway. She pulled out her phone and typed the address into the search bar. The first result was a local forum post from 2 years ago. Don't waste your time on the Blackwood property. Been empty since the 90s, completely trashed. County just wants someone to take the tax burden. Another commenter had added, my dad said the guy who built it disappeared. Just vanished one day. Left everything behind. People say it's haunted. Maya didn't believe in ghosts. She believed in bills with red stamps across them. She believed in late fees compounding until minimum payments exceeded her weekly take-home. She believed in the hard edge of reality that came from being 24 years old with a child and no family to call when the world pressed too close. A dollar house sounded like a scam wrapped in a trap. But even traps deserved investigation when you were this close to the edge. She called the number on the notice while Leo colored on the courthouse steps. A bored-sounding clerk answered and confirmed everything with the enthusiasm of someone reading from a script she'd recited 100 times. Yes, the property was real. Yes, it was truly being sold for $1. No, there was no catch beyond the fact that the buyer would assume all back taxes, currently totaling $8,200, and would be responsible for bringing the property up to code within 18 months or face foreclosure. The clerk made it abundantly clear she thought anyone considering this offer had lost touch with reality. Maya thanked her and hung up, staring at her phone screen where the calculator app still showed her pathetic account balance. 8,000 might as well have been 8 million. But the kernel of an idea had planted itself somewhere between her ribs, taking root in the desperate soil of having no other options. She worked 60 hours a week between the diner and cleaning office buildings after dark. She had decent credit somehow, despite everything, because she'd always paid on time, even if it meant skipping meals. Maybe, just maybe, she could get a loan. Fix the place slowly. Give Leo a real home instead of listening to him cry through nightmares about Marcus's fists hitting walls that sounded too much like flesh. That weekend, she borrowed Frank Morrison's truck, the inspector who had called her about the property after she'd left her number with the county. He'd sighed heavily when she'd asked, but agreed, probably figuring she deserved to see exactly what kind of mistake she was considering. They drove out to Blackwood Lane on a Saturday morning while Leo was at his first ever play date with a boy from school, a small miracle Maya had cried over in the grocery store parking lot because it meant Leo might actually be making friends. The neighborhood started off normal enough. Small houses with neat yards, American flags hanging from porches, children's bikes lying in driveways like evidence of ordinary, stable lives Maya could barely remember. But as they drove further east, following the cracked asphalt road, the houses grew farther apart. Trees pressed in close on both sides, their branches creating a tunnel of green shadow that blocked the morning sun. When the GPS announced they'd arrived, Maya almost missed it entirely. The driveway was completely overgrown. What had once been decorative riverstones were now buried under years of wild grass, weeds, and creeping vines that looked thick enough to trip over. A rusted mailbox tilted at a 45-degree angle, its red flag frozen in the up position. The name on it was too faded to read, weathered into ghost letters. Maya pulled the truck onto the shoulder and got out, telling Leo to wait, except Leo wasn't here. Right, the playdate. Her mind was already scrambling, trying to fit too many pieces into a puzzle that kept changing shape. She pushed through the vegetation, branches catching at her jacket and hair, leaving small scratches on her hands. And then the house revealed itself, and Maya's breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her throat. It was bigger than she'd imagined, 2 stories tall with a 3rd floor that looked like it might be an attic. The mansion sprawled across the overgrown lot like a sleeping giant, something out of a fairy tale that had forgotten its ending. The architecture was distinctly 80s, all sharp angles and geometric windows that would have looked modern once but now just looked dated. The exterior was a faded gray, paint peeling away in long strips like skin after a sunburn. Several windows on the ground floor were broken, dark openings that looked like missing teeth in a skull. The front porch sagged dangerously in the middle, wooden boards bowing under the weight of years and rain and neglect. Vines had claimed the entire right side of the structure, crawling up past the 2nd floor windows and onto the roof where they disappeared into gaps in the shingles. But despite the decay, despite the obvious abandonment, Maya could see something underneath. The house had presence. It had character. The windows, even broken, were large and would let in beautiful light once the glass was replaced. The front door, though hanging crooked on one hinge, was solid oak with an intricate carved pattern. Flowers, or maybe geometric shapes, hard to tell under the grime. Someone had built this with care and vision. Someone had loved this place once. A white pickup truck pulled up behind her borrowed vehicle. Frank Morrison climbed out wearing his county inspector's jacket, a clipboard already in hand. He looked at Maya, then at the house, and shook his head with the world weariness of a man who'd seen too many dreams die on properties just like this one. His voice carried across the overgrown yard. "You the one who called about an inspection?" Maya nodded, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. Frank let out a low whistle. "Ma'am, I appreciate your optimism, but I've got to be straight with you. This place is a disaster. I've done 3 inspections on it over the years for different potential buyers. Every single one walked away." "What's wrong with it?" "What isn't wrong with it?" Frank pulled a worn notebook from his pocket, flipping through pages of previous inspection notes. "Foundation's probably compromised. I saw cracks in the basement walls last time. Roof's definitely shot. I'd bet money there's mold throughout the whole structure. Electrical's ancient, probably knob and tube wiring from the original construction. Plumbing might be functional, but I wouldn't count on it. And that's just what I can see from the outside." Maya swallowed hard. "Can I go inside?" Frank hesitated, looking at her like she was volunteering to jump into a well. "Not without me, and not with your kid. He's not here." "Good, because this isn't safe for anyone, but especially not children." He adjusted his tool belt and started toward the house. "I'll take a quick look. You wait here." Maya waited, watching as Frank approached the sagging porch with the careful steps of someone testing ice. He pushed the front door open with his boot, and it swung inward with a groan of protest that sounded almost human. He disappeared inside. 15 minutes felt like an hour. Maya paced the overgrown driveway, running calculations in her head that never quite added up to anything except failure. She thought about Leo at his playdate, probably happy for the first time in months. Thought about the apartment they'd lose in 3 days. Thought about Marcus finding them if they ended up homeless. How he'd smile that cold smile and tell her she couldn't make it without him. Had never been able to make it on her own. She'd prove him wrong, even if it killed her. Frank emerged finally, brushing cobwebs from his thinning hair, his expression grim. It's bad. Floors are soft in places. Could give way if you're not careful. Ceilings have water damage. Animals have been nesting in there, probably raccoons and possums. The smell alone would knock you over. He paused, studying Maya's face with something that might have been pity or might have been respect for someone about to do something monumentally stupid. Look, I'm not one to crush dreams, but you seem like a nice lady. You've got a kid. This house would eat up every penny you have, and then some. It's not a fixer-upper. It's a teardown. Maya looked past him at the mansion. In the afternoon light, with the sun hitting the windows just right, she could almost see through the grime and broken glass to what it had been, what it could be again. High ceilings, original hardwood, craftsmanship from an era when people built things to last. How much would it bomb to make it livable? Frank laughed, not unkindly, the sound of someone who'd had this conversation before. Livable? You're looking at 50,000 minimum, probably closer to 70 or 80 to really do it right. And that's if you get lucky and don't find any major surprises hidden in the walls. Maya felt the dream crumbling before it had fully formed. She had $300 in savings after paying the parking ticket. $50,000 was impossible. $70,000 was a joke the universe was playing at her expense. But then she heard Leo's voice in her memory from that morning, asking if they'd have to move again, his face already resigned to another upheaval. 8 years old, and he already knew how to pack fast, how to leave things behind, how to not get attached because nothing stayed. Something hardened in Maya's chest. The same determination she'd felt the night she'd packed those suitcases at 2 in the morning. Marcus passed out on the couch, his knuckles still red from where they'd connected with the wall beside her head. The same stubborn refusal to break that had carried her through arriving in Millbrook with no plan and no help. Through taking every degrading, exhausting job she could find, just to make sure Leo had food and clothes and a chance at something better than what she'd had. She turned back to Frank, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. I want to buy it. The inspector stared at her like she'd announced plans to fly to the moon. Did you hear anything I just said? Every word, but it's $1 plus $8,000 in back taxes. I can get a loan for $8,000. I can't get a loan for a real house. This might be the only chance I ever have to own property. Frank rubbed his face with both hands, leaving dirt smears across his forehead. You're making a mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. 2 weeks later, Maya held the deed in her hands, the paper feeling too light for the weight it represented. She'd gotten a high-interest loan from a predatory lender who'd smiled like a shark and made her sign away her soul at 18% APR. The numbers made her stomach hurt to think about, but it was done. The mansion at 427 Blackwood Lane belonged to her and Leo, legally, officially, terrifyingly. The lawyer who'd processed the paperwork had looked at her like she'd lost her mind, sliding the documents across his desk with obvious reluctance. The county clerk had actually wished her good luck in a tone that had suggested she'd need divine intervention and possibly psychiatric help. Word spread fast in small towns where everyone knew everyone else's business. By the time Maya drove back to her rented room above the hardware store, her landlord was waiting with a smug expression and questions about when exactly she'd be moving into her mansion. Emphasis heavy on that last word like it was a punchline. He'd raised her rent the next day, knowing she was stuck until the house became habitable. That night, Maya sat on her narrow bed, Leo already asleep, curled around his stuffed bear, and made lists on the back of junk mail envelopes. She had no idea how to renovate a house. She'd never even owned a house before, but she was good at figuring things out. She'd taught herself to change her car's oil from YouTube videos when the mechanic's quote exceeded her grocery budget. She'd learned to cut Leo's hair by watching tutorials and practicing on herself first, ending up with a choppy bob that at least saved $40 every 6 weeks. How different could fixing up a mansion be? Very different, as it turned out. The first time Maya entered her property with the intention of actually working on it, reality hit like a fist to the solar plexus. She'd borrowed Frank's truck again. He'd sighed but handed over the keys with a gruff reminder to check the oil and loaded it with cleaning supplies from the dollar store. Work gloves, trash bags, a crowbar she'd found at a yard sale. Leo was at school, giving her 6 precious hours. The smell hit her first, even before she fully opened the door. Frank hadn't been exaggerating. It was the scent of rot in animal waste and stagnant water, thick enough to taste. Maya tied a bandana around her face and stepped through the front door into what had once been an entryway. The curved staircase swept up to the second floor like something from an old movie. But several of the balusters were missing, and the banister was loose enough to wobble when she touched it. To her left was what looked like a formal living room, its walls covered in faded floral wallpaper that peeled away in sheets, revealing stained plaster underneath. To her right was a dining room with a crystal chandelier still hanging from the ceiling, coated in dust so thick it looked gray instead of clear. Maya started in the living room because it was closest and because starting felt better than standing paralyzed by the enormity of what she'd taken on. She pulled down wallpaper in long strips that came away with wet, tearing sounds. She swept up piles of leaves that had blown in through broken windows. She carried out broken furniture, a chair with 3 legs, a table with its top split down the middle, mysterious, stained cushions she didn't want to examine too closely. By the end of the first hour, she'd filled 12 trash bags and had only cleared about a quarter of the room. This was going to take forever. But Maya was nothing if not stubborn. She came back the next day, and the next, and the next. She worked after her morning shift at the diner, her back already aching from carrying plates and refilling coffee cups. She worked before her evening cleaning jobs, rushing to get showered and changed before heading to the office buildings downtown. She worked on her days off, which weren't really days off so much as days she only had 1 job instead of 2. She brought Leo with her on weekends, keeping him on the front porch with coloring books and snacks while she tackled the interior. He was good about it, patient in the way children become when they've learned early that complaining doesn't change reality. He'd sit in the sun and draw pictures of the house, always making it look prettier than it was, always adding flowers that didn't exist and fixing the broken windows with bright crayon colors. Slowly, inch by exhausting inch, the house began to reveal itself. Under the grime and decay, Maya discovered beautiful hardwood floors. Oak, maybe, though she wasn't sure. The kitchen, once she'd cleared out the ruined appliances and scrubbed down the counters until her hands were raw, had gorgeous tilework in shades of blue and white. The master bedroom on the second floor had a bay window that overlooked what had once been a garden, now just weeds and wild roses. But she also discovered problems. The basement stairs were rotted through, exactly as Frank had warned. One of the second-floor bathrooms had a hole in the floor where water damage had eaten through the wood, revealing the ceiling of the room below. The attic was full of insulation that was probably asbestos, Frank told her when she called him to ask, adding that removal would cost thousands she didn't have. Every time Maya fixed one thing, she found 3 more things that needed attention. It was like fighting a hydra, except instead of heads, it grew leaks and cracks and mysterious stains that appeared overnight. The people of Millbrook watched her efforts with a mixture of pity and amusement. At the diner, customers would ask how her mansion was coming along, barely concealing their smirks behind coffee cups. On the street, she'd overhear whispers, "That's the crazy girl who bought the Blackwood place. Give her 6 months before she gives up." One of the office building managers where she cleaned had made a joke about whether she was planning to haunt the mansion herself when it inevitably bankrupted her. Maya learned to ignore them. She learned to shut out the doubt and the mockery and focus on the work. 1 room at a time, 1 repair at a time. She learned how to patch drywall from online videos. She learned how to replace broken windows from a retired contractor she'd met at the hardware store, an older man who'd sold her supplies and given advice that saved her from making expensive mistakes. She learned how to sand floors, how to fix leaky pipes with plumber's tape and prayer, how to rewire light fixtures without electrocuting herself. Her hands, which had once been soft from lotion and care, became calloused and scarred. Splinters embedded themselves under her nails. Her back ached constantly. She lost weight she couldn't afford to lose, her jeans hanging loose on hips that had already been too thin. But the house was changing. 4 months after buying it, Maya had the ground floor mostly cleared and cleaned. The hardwood was refinished in the living room, the boards glowing golden in afternoon light. The walls were patched and repainted in a soft cream color she'd found on the clearance rack. She'd even found a used couch at the thrift store and dragged it into the living room with Leo's help, both of them laughing at how ridiculous they must look, hauling furniture up the porch steps. It wasn't much, but when Leo ran through the space, his footsteps echoing off the high ceilings, his laughter filling the empty rooms, Maya felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Something that felt dangerously like hope. She'd started working on the second floor when she found the first clue that the house held secrets deeper than mold and water damage. She was in what she'd decided would be her bedroom, prying up damaged floorboards near the bay window. Frank had helped her identify which boards were too far gone to save, showing her how to test them with a screwdriver and a bounce test that involved jumping on them and listening for creaks. These particular boards came away easily, revealing the subfloor beneath, rough plywood stained dark with years of water damage. Maya reached down to pull out the debris that had fallen between the joists, leaves, and what looked like pieces of old insulation, when her fingers brushed against something that wasn't wood or fiber, something that felt like leather. She pulled it out carefully. A journal, small, bound in brown leather that had water stains across the cover but was still intact. The edges were soft with age, the paper yellowed but readable. Embossed on the front cover were initials she could barely make out. TRB. Maya sat back on her heels, journal in her dirty hands, heart suddenly pounding harder than it should for such a simple discovery. She opened it to the first page, and the handwriting was precise, almost mechanical in its neatness, the kind of writing that belonged to someone who'd learned to draft blueprints before computers made everything clean and uniform. Project log. Day 1. If you're reading this, then you found the first marker. Good. You're paying attention. You'll need that. Maya's breath caught. She flipped through the journal, see after page of notes and sketches and calculations she didn't fully understand. References to energy conversion and magnetic fields in perpetual motion, technical drawings of components and circuits, and scattered throughout, more messages written directly to whoever found this. The banks wouldn't fund it, said it was impossible. They always say that about the things that matter most. I've hidden the prototype pieces throughout the house. If someone finds this place, really finds it, they'll need to work for what I've left behind. No free rides. You have to earn understanding. The final entry was dated March 15, 1991. Maya read it 3 times, her hands shaking slightly. They're coming. Not sure who sent them, but they know what I'm working on. Can't let them take it. Can't let it be buried or locked away or used for the wrong reasons. So I'm scattering it, hiding it. The house will protect the work until the right person comes along. Someone with nothing to lose and everything to fight for. Someone who understands that sometimes the only way forward is through the rubble. If that's you, start in the library. Look for the books that don't belong. TRB. Maya sat on the dusty floor, journal in her hands, mind reeling. She'd bought a house. Just a house. A cheap, broken-down, neglected house that no one else wanted. But this suggested something else entirely. Someone had lived here, had worked on something important enough to hide, and had vanished. Frank had mentioned it. The forum post had mentioned it. The original owner disappeared. She stood up, legs shaky, and went to find the library. It took her 20 minutes of searching before she realized the room she'd been using for storage was actually it. What she'd thought was just another empty room with built-in shelving was actually a library, the books long since removed or destroyed by time and water and neglect. But as Maya looked closer, she saw that one section of shelving was different from the others. The wood was slightly newer, the construction more recent. She ran her hands along the edges, feeling for anything unusual, and found a small gap where the shelf met the wall. When she pulled, the entire bookshelf swung outward like a door, hinges she hadn't noticed squeaking with disuse. Behind it was a staircase leading down into darkness. Maya's mouth went dry. She'd been through every room of this house, every closet, every corner. She'd mapped it in her mind, knew its layout like her own body. But she'd never found this, never even suspected it existed. She needed a flashlight. She needed to tell someone where she was going. She needed to be smart about this because going down into a dark basement in a structurally questionable house alone was exactly the kind of thing that got people killed in movies. She ran to Frank's truck, still parked in the driveway, and grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight she kept in the glove compartment. She pulled out her phone and texted Frank. At mansion, found something weird. If you don't hear from me in 2 hours, come check. His response came almost immediately. What did you find? But Maya didn't answer. She wanted to see it first. Wanted to understand what TRB, Thomas Richard Blackwood, she assumed, had left behind before she tried to explain it to anyone else. She returned to the hidden staircase and began to descend, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The stairs were concrete, surprisingly, and in much better shape than anything else in the house. They led down about 12 feet into a large open space that made Maya's breath stop in her chest. It was a workshop, a laboratory. Long tables lined the walls, covered in equipment she recognized from science classes and things she didn't recognize at all. Oscilloscopes and voltage meters and soldering irons and spools of copper wire. Tools hung on pegboards with the kind of precise organization that spoke of someone who spent serious time in this space. In the center of the room was a large object covered by a canvas tarp, roughly cylindrical and about 4 feet tall. On the far wall was a massive corkboard covered in papers and blueprints and photographs. Maya approached the corkboard first, her flashlight beam sweeping across decades-old research. The blueprints were incredibly detailed, showing some kind of device she didn't recognize. All coils and chambers and crystalline structures arranged in patterns that looked almost artistic. Beside them were pages of calculations, formulas that hurt her eyes to look at, notes written in that same precise handwriting from the journal. One photograph caught her attention. It showed a man in his 50s, thin and intense-looking, standing beside what appeared to be an early version of the covered object in the center of the room. He was smiling, a rare, genuine smile that transformed his serious face, and holding what looked like a small, glowing orb in his hands. The wonder in his expression was almost childlike. Another photograph showed the same man, but older and more tired-looking, standing in front of the mansion when it was new. The paint was fresh, the windows were intact, but he was alone, always alone. Maya turned to the covered object in the center of the room. She grabbed the edge of the tarp and pulled, dust billowing up thick enough to make her cough and cover her face with her arm. But when it settled, she found herself staring at something that looked like a cross between a generator and a sculpture from a modern art museum. It was roughly cylindrical, about 4 feet tall and 3 feet wide, made of copper coils wound in precise patterns, metal plates arranged in layers, crystalline structures she couldn't identify embedded at specific points. Wires ran from it to a series of capacitors and what looked like a control panel with 3 switches and indicator lights. It was beautiful in a strange industrial way, something that belonged in a scientist's fever dream. And according to the notes on the wall, it was supposed to generate clean energy through a process involving magnetic resonance and quantum field manipulation. Maya didn't understand half the words, but the implications were clear enough. The man who'd built this house had been trying to create a revolutionary new form of power generation. And if the journal was to be believed, he'd hidden the final pieces throughout the house before vanishing. Maya spent the rest of that day in the basement workshop, reading through every note she could find, trying to understand the story written in blueprints and formulas and photographs. The man's name was Thomas Richard Blackwood. He'd been an electrical engineer who'd worked for several major companies before quitting to pursue his own research. He'd become obsessed with the idea of clean, infinite energy. His work had been dismissed as pseudoscience by the academic community. His funding had dried up, but he'd continued anyway, pouring his own money into building this house with a hidden laboratory where he could work in peace. The notes suggested he'd gotten close to a breakthrough, close enough that someone had taken notice. He referenced meetings with men in dark suits, phone calls at strange hours. His notes became increasingly paranoid toward the end, but they also became more determined. If they won't let me finish it, he'd written in March 1991, then I'll make sure someone else can. He'd dismantled parts of his prototype and hidden them around the house with clues to their locations. The journal Maya had found was just the first. There were supposed to be more scattered throughout the structure, each one leading to the next, a treasure hunt designed to test whoever found them. When Maya finally climbed back up the hidden stairs, emerging into the library as the sun was setting through dirty windows, she felt like she'd stepped between two different worlds. Up here was her half-renovated house, her normal life of struggle and survival, her plans to make rent and feed her kid. Down there was something else entirely. A mystery, a treasure hunt, a chance at something bigger than she'd ever imagined. She picked Leo up from the neighbor who'd been watching him, Mrs. Patterson, a kind woman in her 70s who refused payment but accepted the cookies Maya baked on her rare days off. She made dinner, helped with homework, put him to bed. Then she sat at her tiny kitchen table in the rented room and opened the journal again, reading by lamplight until her eyes burned and the words started to blur together. The next clue was apparently in the master bedroom, hidden where the sunrise hits first. Maya had already been working in that room. She'd patched walls and fixed the window and even started painting, but she'd never specifically looked at where the sunrise hit, never paid attention to that particular detail. The next morning, Maya arrived at the mansion at dawn, driving through streets still dark and empty. She went straight to the master bedroom and watched as the sun rose over the tree line, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The light streamed through the bay window and hit the far wall, illuminating a section near the corner. Maya approached it and began tapping on the wall, listening for hollow spots the way Frank had taught her. After 10 minutes, she found it, a small section that sounded different from the rest, echoing slightly. She used a utility knife to carefully cut away the plaster, peeling it back like skin. Behind it was a metal box about the size of a shoebox, sealed with a simple latch. Inside the box was another journal. This one focused on mathematical formulas and theoretical physics that made Maya's head spin. Along with it was a component that looked like a specialized circuit board, green and gold with pathways etched in patterns that seemed almost organic. And at the bottom of the box was a note in Thomas Blackwood's handwriting. "You're persistent. Good." The next piece is where children's laughter echoes longest. Maya smiled despite herself. Despite the exhaustion and the fear, and the overwhelming sense that she'd stumbled into something far bigger than a simple house renovation. It was like a game, and she'd always been good at games, good at solving puzzles when the stakes were high enough. That weekend, she brought Leo to the mansion and told him about the treasure hunt. She didn't explain what they were really looking for, didn't want to burden an 8-year-old with the weight of world-changing discoveries or the implications of corporate suppression. She just told him that someone had hidden special items around the house and left clues, and they needed to find them all. Leo's eyes lit up with the kind of excitement he hadn't shown in months, maybe longer. He'd been patient about all the renovation work, understanding in the way only children who'd seen their parents struggle could be. But now this was an adventure he could actually participate in, something fun instead of just watching his mom tear apart walls and carry out trash bags. Together, they searched for where children's laughter echoed longest. They tried every room, Leo laughing and shouting, while Maya listened to how the sound carried and bounced. The living room amplified sound slightly. The dining room with its high ceilings made everything resonate. But nothing felt quite right until they reached what had probably been a playroom on the second floor, tucked away in a corner with built-in shelving and a window seat. When Leo laughed there, the sound echoed strangely, amplifying in a way that seemed intentional rather than accidental. The acoustics were wrong for a normal room, like someone had designed it specifically to make sound behave in unusual ways. Maya examined the closet, running her hands along the walls, and found a loose board near the back. Behind it was another box, this one containing schematics for what the notes called a power coupling system, along with another component, a crystalline matrix that caught the light and refracted it in rainbow patterns. The new clue read, "The heart of the house sees all but reveals nothing without light." They found more over the next 3 months, each discovery bringing them closer to completing Thomas Blackwood's device. They found components in the attic, hidden behind a false wall that Leo had noticed because the wallpaper pattern didn't quite match. Behind the kitchen stove, which took Maya and Mrs. Patterson's son working together to move safely. Under a loose stone in the fireplace that Frank helped her identify. Inside a hollowed-out section of the banister that Maya had been planning to replace anyway. Beneath the back porch steps where raccoons had been nesting. in the walls of the master bathroom, behind a mirror that had seemed slightly off-center. With each discovery, Maya's understanding grew. She started watching physics lectures online late at night after Leo was asleep. MIT opened courseware and Khan Academy videos that explained the basics of quantum mechanics and electromagnetic fields. She joined forums where amateur engineers discussed alternative energy and asked careful questions without revealing too much about what she'd found. She learned to read circuit diagrams and electrical schematics, drawing on the 2 years of engineering courses she'd taken before dropping out when she got pregnant with Leo. The people of Millbrook noticed the change in her. She stopped looking quite so exhausted, quite so defeated. There was something in her eyes now, a spark of excitement that hadn't been there before when customers asked about the mansion. She started answering with enthusiasm instead of defensive brevity, telling them about the architecture and the hidden spaces she was discovering and the history of the place. She didn't tell them about Thomas Blackwood or the device. That felt too precious, too impossible. People already thought she was crazy for buying the house. They'd think she'd completely lost her mind if she told them she was trying to assemble a revolutionary energy machine from parts left by a vanished engineer. But there was one person she needed to tell. One person who might understand and might be able to help. It was month 5, early on a Saturday morning, when Maya was working on refinishing the living room floor. She'd rented a sanding machine from the hardware store and was making good progress, sweat pouring down her face despite the cool autumn air coming through the open windows. The machine was loud enough that she didn't hear footsteps on the porch, didn't notice anyone approaching until a voice cut through the noise. "You're doing that wrong." Maya jumped, releasing the trigger on the sander. She looked up to see an elderly man standing in the doorway, tall despite his age, maybe late 60s, with weathered skin and steady hands that rested comfortably on a tool belt slung around his waist. His expression was neutral, assessing, the look of someone who'd seen a lot of amateur work in his time and wasn't impressed, but also wasn't unkind about it. "Excuse me?" Maya pulled down her dust mask, immediately defensive. "You're going with the grain on pine," he said, stepping into the room without invitation, studying the floor with the critical eye of an expert. "But this is oak. You need to go cross-grain first with coarse grit, then with the grain, then fine grit for finishing. The way you're doing it, you'll never get the old finish off properly." Maya bristled, about to tell this stranger to get out of her house, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the way he looked at the floor with obvious respect for the craftsmanship. Maybe it was the tool belt that showed signs of decades of use. Maybe it was just exhaustion making her willing to accept help from any source. "Who are you?" "Warren Hayes. I live 2 houses down, past the overgrown lot." He pointed vaguely east. "Been watching you work here for months. Figured it was time to introduce myself and maybe save you from ruining these floors." "I'm doing fine on my own." Warren raised an eyebrow. "Are you not? Because from what I've seen, you've been working yourself half to death and making about a dozen mistakes that any experienced carpenter could have warned you about. The window trim you installed last month, did you seal it properly? Because come winter, you're going to have drafts that'll freeze you out." Maya's jaw clenched. She had sealed the trim. She was pretty sure. "Maybe." "Why do you care?" "Because I knew Thomas Blackwood," Warren said quietly, and suddenly Maya's full attention snapped to him. "The man who built this place. And because this house deserves better than to be slowly destroyed by someone too proud to accept help." Something in his tone made Maya pause. This wasn't mockery. This wasn't pity. This was someone who genuinely cared about the house for reasons that went beyond nosiness or entertainment. "What do you know about Thomas Blackwood?" Warren's expression shifted, becoming more serious. "Knew him slightly, anyway. We weren't close friends, but we'd talk over the fence sometimes when I walk my dog past here. This was back in the late 80s, early 90s. Brilliant man, a bit troubled toward the end. Paranoid, people said, but maybe he had reason to be." Maya's heart was pounding now. "What do you mean?" "He was working on something. Wouldn't say what exactly, but I got the impression it was important. Revolutionary even. Then one day in March 1991, he was just gone. House was empty, car still in the garage. No note, no explanation. Police investigated briefly, found no signs of foul play, ruled it a voluntary disappearance." Warren looked around the room at the work Maya had done, at the house slowly coming back to life. Never sat right with me. Maya made a decision in that moment. Maybe it was stupid. Maybe she'd regret it. But something about Warren Hayes felt trustworthy in a way she hadn't felt about anyone since arriving in Millbrook. "I found something," she said quietly. "Something Thomas left behind. Hidden. And I think I need help." Warren met her eyes, and something passed between them, an understanding, a recognition of stakes higher than either of them had expected. "Show me." Maya led Warren down the hidden staircase, their flashlight beams crisscrossing in the darkness, like searchlights hunting for something that had been buried deliberately. When they reached the laboratory, Warren stopped breathing for what felt like a full minute. His hand reached out to steady himself against one of the workbenches, knuckles going white. "Jesus Christ." His voice came out rough, decades of military composure cracking around the edges. "He actually did it. Thomas actually built the damn thing." Maya watched Warren move through the space like a man encountering a ghost he'd spent 30 years trying to forget. He examined the blueprints on the corkboard with the careful attention of someone who understood what they represented. Not just theory, but the kind of obsession that consumed lives. "What is it exactly?" Warren's finger traced one of the technical drawings, following copper coil patterns that spiraled in on themselves. Zero-point energy converter, or something close enough to terrify anyone who understood the implications. Every aerospace engineer dreams about this. Cold fusion, perpetual motion, breaking thermodynamics. Pick your impossible dream. Nobody's ever made it work. Thomas thought he did. Thomas was smart enough that we better find out if he was right. Warren turned to face her, and something shifted in his expression. Recognition of stakes beyond simple curiosity. "But we need to be methodical. Careful. This isn't amateur hour anymore." They spent the next week researching Thomas Blackwood's history through public records and Warren's connections at the local historical society. The story emerged in fragments. Only child, parents dead by his 30s, never married. Colleagues described him as brilliant but increasingly isolated. Late 80s, he'd fixated on clean energy with the intensity of religious conversion. Patents filed and rejected. Corporate employers cutting ties when profit projections came back negative. 1988, he quit and vanished into his home laboratory, burning through savings with the certainty of someone who knew he was right, even as the world called him crazy. Martin Reeves appeared in the records too, another engineer, Thomas's closest friend. Died in a single-car accident November 1990 on a clear night on a road he'd driven for 20 years. Police report called it driver fatigue. Thomas's notes suggested murder. Warren showed Maya newspaper clippings he'd pulled from storage boxes in his garage, yellowed pages that documented Thomas's disappearance. House found empty, March 1991. Car in garage. Wallet on kitchen counter. No signs of struggle. Investigation lasted 2 weeks before being filed away as voluntary disappearance. One more eccentric loner who decided to walk away from a life that had stopped making sense. "I never bought it," Warren admitted, sitting at Maya's kitchen table in the rented room while Leo slept in the next space over. Thomas was paranoid by the end, sure, but he wasn't suicidal, and he wasn't the type to just leave. He'd have finished his work first, or died trying. Inside, journals filled with formulas that made Warren's eyes light up, circuit boards etched with pathways that seemed to follow mathematical patterns rather than simple electrical logic, and notes that led them to the master bedroom. Dawn came cold through the bay window, illuminating the far corner where Thomas's next cache waited behind plaster. Maya's cutting technique had improved under Warren's tutelage. Straight lines, minimal damage, easy to patch later. The metal box contained electromagnetic coil assembly specs and a note about children's laughter, which Leo solved by testing acoustics in every room until the former playroom revealed itself through sonic peculiarities no adult would have noticed. "Smart," Warren murmured, examining the crystalline matrix Leo had found behind the loose board. "Hide your most valuable work where innocence leads. Adults overthink. Kids just play." They found components behind the kitchen stove, Warren's metalworker friend helping them move the hulking appliance without damaging the tilework. In the fireplace, beneath a stone, whose mortar Frank Morrison identified as newer than the surrounding masonry. Inside the banister Maya had been planning to replace, hollowed out with precision that spoke of careful planning rather than desperate improvisation. Under the porch steps where raccoon nests had disguised human interference. Behind the bathroom mirror that had hung slightly crooked for reasons that finally made sense. Each discovery came with Warren's technical explanations, turning Maya's scattered understanding into something approaching comprehension. The electromagnetic coils had to be wound at specific tensions. Too tight and the magnetic field wouldn't form properly, too loose and the resonance would scatter. The crystalline matrices were synthetic quartz grown for specific piezoelectric properties, vibrating at frequencies that matched the quantum cascade initiator's output range. The voltage regulation circuit wasn't just safety equipment, but the difference between controlled energy generation and catastrophic overload. Thomas designed this with redundancy in mind. Warren spread the components across the workshop floor like pieces of an incredibly complex jigsaw puzzle. If one system fails, the others compensate. Military-grade engineering. This wasn't academic exercise. This was meant to work. Maya's hands learned new skills under Warren's patient instruction. Proper soldering technique where the iron temperature mattered as much as the angle. Circuit testing with an oscilloscope, reading sine waves and frequency patterns that told stories about electron flow and resistance. Metalworking basics when they needed to fabricate a replacement component after one piece arrived corroded beyond repair. She watched YouTube tutorials at night and practiced on scrap materials during lunch breaks at the diner, her coworkers making jokes about her becoming a mad scientist in her haunted mansion. The jokes stopped being entirely jokes when Maya started noticing the surveillance. Month 8 of renovation, she was carrying trash bags to the curb when she spotted the dark sedan parked across the street. Third time that week. Same car, different driver, always with a camera that had a lens too long for casual photography. When she walked toward it, the sedan pulled away smoothly, professionally, the kind of exit that had suggested practice. Warren found the first camera mounted in the oak tree at the property line, its lens aimed directly at the front door. Professional equipment, expensive, the kind corporations used when they wanted plausible deniability. He crushed it under his boot without ceremony. Apex energy. Warren's voice carried certainty born from decades reading situations correctly. Has to be. Nobody else would care this much about a rundown house in rural Pennsylvania. Frank Morrison confirmed it when he stopped by the next day with information he'd gathered through county channels. Strange men asking questions about Maya at the assessor's office, claiming to represent a property evaluation firm that didn't exist when Frank called the listed phone number. Someone had requested building plans for 427 Blackwood Lane, requests Frank had denied, but that left paper trails pointing back to shell companies with addresses in Houston and Delaware. The harassment stayed professional, almost polite. Maya's bank account got flagged for routine audit. Her barely functional car failed inspection over a cracked taillight lens that had passed the previous month. Leo's school received an anonymous report about home instability, triggering a social services visit that ended with the caseworker praising the renovation work and closing the file same day. Property tax assessment revised upward by 40%. Building permit applications delayed with bureaucratic roadblocks that materialized out of nowhere. Classic pressure campaign, Warren explained, sweeping the property for new cameras with equipment borrowed from his veteran friends. Make life difficult. Hope you give up. They can't attack directly without exposing themselves, so they use systems against you. Maya had dealt with worse. Marcus's fists had taught her that there were different kinds of violence, and the bureaucratic kind was survivable with patience and documentation. She kept records of every interaction, every delay, every suspicious coincidence. Ellen Vasquez, a lawyer Warren knew from his aerospace days, reviewed the file and confirmed what they all suspected. Coordinated harassment designed to look like unfortunate timing. They want you gone before you find something worth protecting, Ellen said, her office overlooking Pittsburgh's downtown from the 20th floor of a steel and glass tower, which means there's something worth protecting. The assembly phase consumed 3 months of nights and weekends. Warren moved equipment from his garage into the laboratory, teaching Maya the difference between good enough and precise. Thomas's specifications were exact. Tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, frequency matches requiring decimal point accuracy. They tested each component independently, verifying function before integration, building the device in layers like Thomas's blueprints dictated. The copper coils went first, wound around the central quantum chamber with a pitch and tension that Warren checked using instruments he'd built specifically for this purpose. Maya learned the physical memory of proper technique, the feel of wire under her fingers, the resistance that meant she'd reach correct tightness, the musical hum that indicated resonance forming. Crystalline matrices mounted at calculated angles, positioned using laser levels and measurements triple-checked because a single degree of error could shatter them under operational stress. Warren showed her how to bond them with specialized epoxy that could withstand vibration and temperature fluctuations, working in a ventilated environment because the fumes could kill brain cells if you weren't careful. The voltage regulation circuit took a week to integrate properly, Warren designing the connections because this was his specialty, decades of aerospace experience channeled into ensuring the device wouldn't overload and explode. They tested each pathway with an oscilloscope, looking for clean signals that indicated proper electron flow. Green readings meant success, yellow meant adjustments needed, red meant start over before someone got electrocuted. The quantum field generator remained mysterious even after installation. Warren admitted the limits of his understanding here, following Thomas's specifications because the mathematics checked out even if the underlying physics stretched credibility. They mounted it according to the blueprints, wired it according to the schematics, and hoped Thomas had known what he was doing when he designed something that seemed to violate everything they'd learned about energy conservation. The magnetic containment field was Warren's favorite component, elegant engineering that created stable conditions for quantum effects that should have collapsed instantly. Multiple feedback loops cross-referenced themselves, each one monitoring the others, building redundancy into a system that couldn't afford single-point failures. "It's beautiful," Warren whispered when they completed the final connection, standing back to look at what they'd built. "Thomas designed this like a cathedral. Every piece serves the whole. Nothing wasted, nothing there just for show." 3 months after beginning assembly, the device stood complete in the laboratory. Maya and Warren circled it like priests at an altar, checking and rechecking connections, verifying that every specification matched Thomas's blueprints, that no shortcuts had been taken, that no critical detail had been overlooked. They documented everything with cameras and detailed notes, creating backup copies stored in 3 separate locations because neither of them trusted that Apex wouldn't try something more direct. Warren suggested contacting Dr. Sarah Mitchell at MIT before attempting activation. He knew her by reputation, rigorous, skeptical, ethical in a field where ethics often been around grant money. Maya drafted an email from the library's public computer, keeping details vague but intriguing enough to catch attention. Completed Blackwood device, quantum cascade energy generation, request verification. They sent it and waited, expecting nothing. Cranks emailed scientists constantly, and Maya knew how she must sound. Single mom with incomplete degree, claiming to have built revolutionary technology in a basement laboratory. But if Mitchell responded, they'd at least have independent verification before risking activation. Why a green light came on when they connected the battery, system drawing initial power. Warren threw the first switch and the humming started. Low, resonant, the sound of magnetic fields forming in patterns that shouldn't exist according to conventional physics. Copper coils began glowing faint amber, heat radiating in waves they could feel from 10 feet away. Yellow light held steady on the control panel. Field established. Magnetic containment active. All readings nominal. Warren checked the oscilloscope, his face illuminated by the green glow of the display. Field strength climbing. 47 hertz, 89, 127. Perfect match to Thomas's specifications. Maya's hand moved toward the second switch, and everything in her wanted to stop, to walk away, to not risk the next moment because success meant everything changed and failure meant months of work had been chasing delusion. But Leo's face flickered through her mind. His smile when he'd helped find clues. His pride when he'd contributed to something important. His future that deserved better than minimum wage and struggle. She threw the second switch. The red light flickered once, twice, 3 times like a dying heartbeat, then darkness. The humming dropped away. Amber glow faded to nothing. Complete system shut down in less than 5 seconds. Maya stared at the dead device, something breaking inside her chest that felt too much like hope dying. It doesn't work. Warren was already moving, pulling out his multimeter, checking connections with the systematic approach of someone refusing to accept defeat without understanding why. They spent the next 3 hours diagnosing, testing every circuit, verifying every component. Everything functioned perfectly in isolation. But the cascade wouldn't initiate. The quantum effect that should have made the system self-sustaining never materialized. At 3 in the morning, they sat on the laboratory floor surrounded by tools and test equipment and the corpse of their dream. Maya cried quietly, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. Warren put his arm around her shoulders with the awkward gentleness of someone who'd lost his own daughter and knew grief had no shortcuts. 3 months. Maya's voice broke on the words. All that work, for nothing. Warren pulled Thomas's journal from the workbench, flipping through pages they'd read dozens of times, looking for something they'd missed. He found it in a margin note, handwriting so small they had overlooked it before. Critical. Cascade requires precise frequency match to quantum chamber resonance. Off by 0.1 Hz goes failure. Must measure chamber first, then tune cascade initiator to exact match. Harmonic analyzer essential. We didn't tune it, Warren breathed, showing Maya the note. We assembled everything correctly, but we never matched the frequencies. It's like trying to open a combination lock when you're one number off. Close isn't good enough. Do we have a harmonic analyzer? No, but I can build one. Warren spent the following week in his garage, constructing custom equipment from scavenged parts and precision components ordered online. He showed Maya the finished analyzer, a device that measured resonant frequencies of any structure, accurate to a hundredth of a hertz. They tested the quantum chamber and discovered it vibrated at 447.3 Hz, a frequency so specific it had to be intentional. Warren adjusted the cascade initiator over 3 days of painstaking work, tuning circuits with the patience of someone who understood that precision mattered more than speed. When he finally achieved perfect frequency match, he looked exhausted and triumphant. Thomas knew what he was doing. Every decimal matters. We were off by 0.8 hertz. Might as well have been a mile. The surveillance intensified during the repair period. New cameras appeared weekly despite Warren's regular sweeps. Maya's phone developed clicks on calls that suggested tapping or at minimum monitoring. Her email account showed login attempts from Houston IP addresses. Dark sedans multiplied, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, rotating shifts like they wanted her to know she was being watched. Frank reported that Apex Energy had filed inquiries about environmental concerns at the property, claiming they'd received complaints about hazardous materials disposal. Complete fabrication, but it triggered EPA paperwork that took weeks to clear. Warren's veteran friends started providing informal security, taking shifts watching the house from their trucks, making their presence obvious enough to discourage anything more aggressive than surveillance. They're scared, Warren observed, crushing another camera under his boot. Scared people make mistakes. We just need to stay careful until we can go public. The second test happened on a Tuesday evening, replacement component installed and frequency tuned to perfection. Warren and Maya approached the device with the wary respect of people who'd already experienced failure and couldn't afford another one. Battery connected, green light on, switch 1 activated. The humming came deeper this time, more resonant, like the device itself knew something had changed. Amber glow intensified until they had to shield their eyes against the brightness. Yellow light steady and strong. Warren's voice shook as he read the oscilloscope. Frequency lock achieved. All fields aligned. Magnetic containment holding steady. Maya closed her eyes and threw the second switch before fear could stop her. Red light flickered. Held. And suddenly the laboratory exploded with white light, so clean and pure, it felt like looking into creation itself. Not just glowing, but radiating, pouring energy into the air with an intensity that made their skin tingle and their hair stand on end. Warren stared at the instruments, voice breaking. Input 12 watts, output 47, climbing to 83, stabilizing at 127 watts. He looked up at Maya with tears streaming down his face, and she'd never seen an old soldier cry before. Never understood that joy could hurt this much. It works. Thomas was right. It actually works. They ran tests for 4 hours, powering down and restarting, verifying repeatability, documenting every measurement with the thoroughness of people who knew no one would believe without overwhelming evidence. The device performed identically every time. Battery initiated the cascade. Quantum effects took over. System became self-sustaining while generating 10 times more energy than it consumed. No degradation, no fluctuation. Perfect stability that violated thermodynamics unless Thomas had actually tapped into zero-point energy the way his notes suggested. When they finally shut down for the night, sitting in the afterglow of success, Warren pulled Maya into a fierce hug that felt like family. We did it, you and me and Thomas's ghost. We built something impossible. What happens now? Now we prove it to the world. Judge Sarah Mitchell's response arrived 3 days later. Ms. Chen, I receive dozens of claims like yours monthly. Most are nonsense, but Blackwood and Quantum Cascades suggest you've at least done your homework. I'm in Pittsburgh next month for a conference. I'll drive to Millbrook. If this is legitimate, I need to see it. If it's fraud, I'll expose it. Fair? Warren smiled, reading it over Maya's shoulder. She's interested, skeptical as hell, but interested. The same day, a registered letter arrived from Apex Energy Corporation Legal Department. Professional letterhead, polite language. Offering to purchase the property for $150,000, significantly above market value for a house still under renovation. No mention of devices or Thomas or anything specific. Just a generous offer with a 30-day deadline. Opening move, Warren said, holding the letter up to the light like it might reveal hidden messages. They know we found something. This is them testing how much we know and whether we're for sale. Maya thought about Marcus's threats, about how he'd always started with charm before escalating to violence when charm failed. We don't respond? We don't respond. Let them wonder. They'll escalate, but we've got 3 weeks to prepare before Mitchell arrives. 3 weeks to make this undeniable. They spent those weeks finishing the house renovation, or enough of it to be presentable when scientists came calling. Warren recruited friends to help with the heavy work, explaining they were getting the place ready for an important visitor without specifying why. The main floor became beautiful, hardwood glowing and walls painted in warm neutrals. Second floor livable, bedrooms furnished with thrift store finds that Leo had helped pick out. Exterior still rough but structurally sound, no longer looking like it might collapse in a strong wind. The community's attitude shifted as the house transformed. People who'd mocked Maya now stopped to admire the progress, asking genuine questions about techniques she'd used and where she'd learned her skills. Warren's involvement added legitimacy. If Hayes was helping, maybe the crazy girl wasn't so crazy after all. Leo's teacher sent a note praising his improved attitude and academic performance, noting that stability at home was making all the difference. But the surveillance continued, more aggressive now. 3 sedans in rotation, cameras that reappeared hours after Warren destroyed them. Frank reported that Apex had filed additional inquiries with the county, building what looked like a legal case for environmental intervention that would give them access to the property. On the Friday before Dr. Mitchell's scheduled visit, Maya was working late in the laboratory, making final preparations, when she heard footsteps above. Heavy boots that didn't belong to Warren or Frank or anyone else who had legitimate reasons to be there. Her phone was upstairs. The secret door was closed, and someone was in her house uninvited. She grabbed a wrench and moved to the bottom of the stairs, listening. Multiple sets of footsteps, low voices coordinating in professional tones. This wasn't vandalism or robbery. This was planned. Maya crept up the stairs, weapon ready, mind racing through options. The stairs opened into the library. If she could reach the front door, get outside where neighbors might see, call for help from somewhere with witnesses. She pushed the secret door open a crack and saw 3 men in dark clothes examining the hidden entrance they'd somehow discovered. One held a camera. One held what looked like electronic detection equipment. The third was speaking into a phone with the calm authority of someone reporting to a superior. Confirmed. Laboratories here, exactly where the blueprints indicated. Device is operational based on energy readings. No sign of occupant, but we should move fast. Maya's breath caught. They had blueprints? How? Unless they'd been watching longer than anyone suspected. Unless Thomas's paranoia about Apex hadn't gone far enough. Unless this had been planned for decades. Before she could decide whether to confront or hide, sirens cut through the night air. Police cruisers, multiple vehicles, response time that suggested someone had called them before the break-in even happened. Warren's voice boomed from outside. "Millbrook Police! Everyone out with hands visible!" The three men scattered, two escaping through windows, one caught in the living room by officers who'd surrounded the house with the efficiency of a coordinated operation. Warren appeared in the doorway moments later, tool belt still on, phone in hand, looking like he'd expected this. "You called before they even got here." Maya's voice shook with adrenaline crash. "Had cameras of my own installed. Motion sensors. The second they crossed the property line, I knew." Warren's expression was grim satisfaction. "Caught one of them. Phone in his pocket that traces back to Apex corporate security contractor. They just handed us evidence." The caught intruder sat in handcuffs in Frank's truck, refusing to speak except to invoke his right to a lawyer. His phone, however, told stories he wouldn't. Text messages, coordinating surveillance, emails referencing Blackwood Project, GPS data showing months of tracking Maya's movements. Ellen Vasquez reviewed everything with the hungry smile of a lawyer who'd just been handed a winning case. Corporate espionage, attempted theft, possibly conspiracy if we can prove coordination at executive level. She photographed every message, every call log, building a file that made Apex's interest undeniable. "They're going to wish they'd left you alone." The story hit local news before midnight. Energy company accused of breaking into alternative energy researcher's home. Criminal investigation opened. Questions about what they were trying to steal. By morning, it had spread to regional coverage. By afternoon, national outlets were calling Maya's disconnected number and showing up at the property with camera crews. Warren fielded them all with military precision, giving just enough information to create interest without revealing specifics. Ms. Chen has completed important research related to clean energy. Certain parties have expressed aggressive interest in suppressing that research. We're cooperating with authorities and will make a full statement soon. Dr. Sarah Mitchell called instead of emailing. "What the hell did you find that has Apex Energy breaking into houses?" Maya's laugh came out slightly hysterical. "Something that works, and I can prove it. I'm coming tomorrow instead of next week. Clear your schedule." Maya stood in the renovated mansion that night, Leo asleep upstairs in his new bedroom, with his window overlooking the town that had finally accepted them, and felt the weight of what she'd accidentally become. Not just a single mom trying to survive, not just someone who'd bought a dollar house and fixed it up. She was the woman who'd found Thomas Blackwood's legacy, who'd completed his impossible work, who'd proven that clean energy was achievable and had been suppressed for decades. Tomorrow, Dr. Mitchell would arrive and either validate everything or expose her as a delusional amateur. Either way, there was no going back. The secret was too big to keep now, the stakes too high to walk away from. And somewhere in Houston, Richard Vance was probably making calls about how to contain a situation that had just become very publicly complicated. Warren found her standing at the bay window, looking out at the dark street where a single sedan still watched despite everything. Nervous? His voice carried the understanding of someone who'd been in high-pressure situations before. Terrified. "Good. Means you understand what's at stake." Warren stood beside her, and together they watched the watching car. "Tomorrow we change the world, or we fail spectacularly trying. Either way, we do it together." Maya thought about Thomas Blackwood, alone in this house 33 years ago, knowing he was right but having no one to trust, no one to help him finish what he'd started. She thought about all the ways her life could have gone differently. Staying with Marcus, never seeing that notice in the courthouse, walking away when Frank warned her, giving up after the first test failure. Every decision had led here, to this moment, to standing in a mansion she'd bought for $1 with a device in the basement that could change everything. Together, she agreed and meant it more than she'd meant anything in years. Dr. Sarah Mitchell arrived at 9 a.m. sharp, rental car pulling into the driveway with the precision of someone who valued punctuality. She emerged wearing practical field clothes, jeans, hiking boots, a canvas jacket with enough pockets to hold instruments. 38 years old, according to Warren's research, but her eyes carried the skepticism of someone twice that age who'd seen too many miracle claims dissolve under scrutiny. Maya met her at the door, acutely aware of how she must look. Single mom in work clothes, hands still bearing calluses from renovation. No credentials beyond 2 years of incomplete engineering courses. Sarah's handshake was firm, assessing, the grip of someone deciding whether to waste time or walk away. You're the one who emailed, the single mother who supposedly completed Thomas Blackwood's work. That's me, and this is Warren Hayes, who helped with the technical assembly. Sarah's gaze shifted to Warren. Warren found something there that made her expression soften fractionally. Air Force, I can tell by the posture. 30 years, then aerospace engineering until retirement. Warren's voice carried no defensiveness, just facts presented for evaluation. So at least one of you knows what you're doing. Sarah looked at the mansion, taking in the renovated exterior with approval that seemed grudging. Show me what you found. The descent into the laboratory felt different with a scientist present, less like entering a secret cave and more like presenting evidence for judgment. Sarah moved through the space with methodical attention, examining blueprints first, then Thomas's notes, then the device itself. She pulled out a tablet and photographed everything, occasionally making sounds that could have been interest or dismissal. After 20 minutes of silent inspection, she spoke without looking at them. Some of these equations, I've seen theoretical papers exploring similar territory. Quantum vacuum energy extraction, zero-point field manipulation, but nobody's actually built hardware. She stopped, searching for accurate language. This is either brilliant or delusional, possibly both. We can demonstrate it working. Sarah's eyes snapped to Maya, sharp enough to cut. You've activated this? Successfully? Warren answered it twice. Full cascade initiation both times. Energy output 10 times input. Sustained and stable. That's impossible. That's what we thought too, until it happened. Sarah studied them for a long moment, looking for signs of fraud or delusion, or the kind of desperate need that made people see what they wanted instead of what existed. Whatever she found must have been compelling because she pulled more equipment from her backpack. Multimeter, thermal camera, spectrum analyzer, devices Maya didn't recognize. Then let's find out if you're lying, crazy, or if Thomas Blackwood was actually a genius nobody listened to. The activation sequence felt different under scientific observation. Maya's hands moved through the steps with muscle memory, while Sarah monitored every reading, every change, every measurement that could reveal truth or expose fabrication. Battery connected, green light engaged, switch 1 thrown. The humming started, and Sarah's thermal camera showed heat blooming in patterns that followed the magnetic field lines Warren had predicted. Consistent with field generation, temperature distribution matches theoretical models. Yellow light held steady. Warren called out oscilloscope readings that matched their previous test exactly. Frequency lock at 447.3 Hz, magnetic containment stable, all systems nominal. Maya threw the second switch and white light flooded the laboratory with an intensity that made Sarah raise her hand to shield her eyes. The spectrum analyzer in her other hand went wild, displaying energy signatures that shouldn't exist according to conventional physics. Sarah stared at her instruments, then at the device, then back at her instruments like checking would change what they showed. Input 10 watts, output, her voice cracked slightly, output climbing through 80, stabilizing at 127. She checked for hidden power sources with equipment designed to detect exactly that kind of fraud. Found nothing, measured electromagnetic radiation, and confirmed it remained within safe limits. Analyzed frequency spectra and discovered patterns that matched quantum cascade signatures from theoretical papers she'd probably written herself. The device ran for an hour while Sarah performed every test imaginable, her skepticism crumbling measurement by measurement into something that looked dangerously like wonder. When Maya finally powered it down, Sarah sat on a workbench stool with her head in her hands. This is real. The words came out muffled by her palms. This is actually real. Do you understand what you've built? Maya glanced at Warren, saw her own uncertainty reflected back. We think so. No. Sarah looked up, and her expression had transformed from skeptical scientist to someone witnessing the kind of discovery that redefined fields. You don't. This device, if it scales, if we can replicate it, could eliminate fossil fuel dependency within a decade. Climate change mitigation, energy poverty solved, economic restructuring on a scale that makes the Industrial Revolution look like a footnote. She stood abruptly, pacing the laboratory with energy that suggested her mind was already 10 steps ahead. This is Nobel Prize work. This is one of the most significant discoveries of the century, and you built it in a basement with hand tools and stubbornness. Warren's dry laugh broke the tension. Stubbornness was definitely the main ingredient. Sarah pulled out her phone, already making calls. I'm bringing colleagues. MIT, Stanford, Caltech. Independent verification from people whose reputations guarantee credibility. We document everything, run controlled tests, eliminate any possibility of error or fraud. Then we go public in a way that makes suppression impossible. Apex Energy will try to stop us. Apex Energy just became the villain in a story about corporate greed versus scientific truth. Let them try. Sarah's smile carried the fierce satisfaction of someone who'd spent a career fighting for ethical research against commercial interests. We move faster than they can react. Make this undeniable before they figure out how to bury it. Over the next 2 weeks, the mansion transformed into an impromptu research facility. Sarah brought 4 colleagues who each ran independent verification protocols. James Rodriguez from Stanford spent 3 days testing the electromagnetic coil arrays, confirming that the field generation matched theoretical predictions for zero-point energy extraction. Dr. Keiko Tanaka from Caltech analyzed the quantum cascade mechanism with equipment that cost more than Maya's entire house, emerging with data that validated Thomas's core physics. Dr. Marcus Webb from Carnegie Mellon examined the crystalline matrices and identified them as synthetic quartz, with piezoelectric properties engineered to specifications that shouldn't have been achievable in '91. Dr. Elena Volkov from Berkeley ran efficiency calculations and projected that scaled production could power residential homes at a fraction of current energy costs. Each scientist reached the same conclusion through different methodologies. The device worked as claimed, represented revolutionary technology, and had been suppressed or overlooked for 33 years for reasons that demanded investigation. Ellen Vasquez arrived with patent applications already drafted, filing preliminary paperwork that established priority date and listed Maya as primary inventor based on property ownership and completion of Thomas's work. Warren was named co-developer. Thomas Blackwood received posthumous credit as original designer. The patent attorney's expression suggested she understood they were documenting something that would be studied in law schools for decades. Congratulations! You just became very valuable people, which also makes you targets. The morning after patent filing, a registered letter arrived requesting Maya's presence at a meeting in Pittsburgh. Apex Energy Corporation. Richard Vance personally. Ellen advised refusing. Warren argued they should go and record everything. Sarah suggested it was a trap, but potentially useful for documenting corporate malfeasance. Maya made the decision. We go. We hear what they offer. We know our enemy. The hotel conference room felt designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, leather chairs that cost more than monthly rent, art on the walls that screamed expense without beauty. Richard Vance entered, flanked by 2 attorneys and a corporate vice president, all expensive suits and practiced smiles. 52 years old, silver hair, the kind of face that appeared in business magazines under headlines about effective leadership and market dominance. He greeted them with warmth that felt rehearsed. Ms. Chen, thank you for coming. Mr. Hayes, I understand you have been doing remarkable work on the old Blackwood property. Maya waited for the actual purpose to emerge, keeping her expression neutral while Ellen recorded everything on her phone with Vance's advance permission. Apex Energy would like to make a generous offer. Vance slid papers across the polished table. $2 million immediate payment for the property and all contents. Additionally, $1 million consulting contract for you and Mr. Hayes over 5 years. We handle further development, assume all risk and costs. What about the device, the discovery? Vance's smile remained perfectly calibrated, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. What device? The property contains interesting historical equipment, certainly. Thomas Blackwood was a respected engineer, but technology from 1901, he trailed off with a shrug that communicated obsolescence. Warren's voice came flat and hard. You're trying to bury it. just like you buried Thomas's work 30 years ago. Mr. Hayes, let's keep this professional. Vance's tone stayed pleasant, but an edge appeared underneath. We're interested in the land primarily, historical preservation. The Blackwood name means something in energy circles. Maya felt ice forming in her stomach as she recognized the pattern. The same approach Marcus had used, starting with charm before revealing the threat underneath. And if we refuse, then you're taking on enormous risk. Vance leaned back, making the gesture seem casual while his words landed with calculated weight. Miss Chen, you're a smart woman. Consider your position. Single mother, minimal savings, working multiple jobs. Your son, Leo, correct? Needs stability, security. Our offer provides that. Immediate financial freedom. The mention of Leo's name made something primal surge in Maya's chest. Are you threatening my child? Vance raised his hands in a gesture of innocence that fooled nobody. Threatening? Absolutely not. Simply noting facts. You're undertaking a complex project with significant challenges. Patent litigation alone costs millions and takes years. Scientific verification requires resources you don't have. Media scrutiny of your background, dropped out of school, fled an abusive relationship, can be cruel. He cataloged potential problems with the efficiency of someone who'd engineered them. Building code violations are expensive to remediate. Property tax assessments can be revised. Environmental regulations require compliance that costs more than most people can afford. Child services investigations are stressful, even when unfounded. Ellen's voice cut through the carefully constructed threat. You're describing harassment, Mr. Vance. Illegal harassment that we're documenting. I'm describing reality. Ms. Chen should understand what she's facing before declining our generous offer. Vance stood, signaling the meeting's end. You have our proposal. I suggest you accept it. The alternative will be considerably less pleasant. Maya stood too, meeting his eyes with the same refusal to break that had gotten her through every impossible situation before this one. Thomas Blackwood built something that could change the world. He hid it because people like you wanted it buried. I found it, I completed it, and I'm not selling it to you for any amount of money. Then I hope you are prepared for the consequences. They left with recording of everything, evidence that would matter if this ever reached court. But as Warren drove them back to Millbrook, the weight of what they were fighting settled heavy. The harassment campaign escalated within 48 hours. Property tax assessment revised upward by 300% based on unreported improvements. Building permits challenged through procedural technicalities that materialized from nowhere. EPA investigation opened into alleged hazardous materials disposal, with inspectors demanding access to the laboratory within 7 days. Maya's bank accounts frozen pending completion of expanded financial audit. Her car insurance canceled for risk assessment reasons that violated no actual policy. But Millbrook surprised them. Frank Morrison testified before the county commissioners that every inspection had shown proper renovation work with no violations. The diner owner wrote letters supporting Maya's character and work ethic. Leo's teacher and principal both vouched for stable home environment and excellent parenting. Mrs. Patterson organized neighbors to attend the property tax appeal hearing. Elderly voices raised in defense of the young woman who'd taken on an impossible project and succeeded against all odds. Warren's veteran friends provided more direct support, rotating watches at the property in trucks that advertised military service and suggested anyone trying intimidation would face organized resistance. When the EPA inspectors arrived demanding immediate access, they found Frank Morrison waiting with county documentation showing all renovations had been permitted and approved, and a lawyer ready to fight any overreach of federal authority. The social services case collapsed after a 30-minute home visit revealed Leo thriving in beautifully renovated surroundings with a mother who clearly prioritized his well-being above everything. The caseworker actually apologized for the anonymous complaint, calling it obviously vindictive rather than legitimate concern. Small-town solidarity turned out to be armor against corporate power that relied on isolation and helplessness. Maya watched her community, people who'd mocked her months ago, transform into fierce defenders, and something in her chest unclenched slightly. The press conference happened 2.5 weeks after Sarah's initial visit, hosted by the university to provide institutional credibility. The auditorium filled beyond capacity with media, scientists, curious students, and locals who'd driven from Millbrook to witness their own becoming part of history. Maya sat at the front table between Warren and Sarah, facing cameras and questions that would determine whether this stayed scientific curiosity or became genuine revolution. Sarah spoke first, her voice carrying the authority of someone whose reputation guaranteed attention. We're here to present a verified working prototype of a quantum vacuum energy converter, discovered and completed by Ms. Maya Chen at property formerly owned by Dr. Thomas Blackwood. The device generates 10 times more energy than it consumes through a stable, repeatable process independently verified by 5 separate institutions. Gasps rippled through the audience. Phones emerged, recording everything, spreading this moment across networks before she'd finished speaking. Sarah continued over the rising noise. This is clean energy, sustainable energy, revolutionary energy that could eliminate fossil fuel dependency and address climate change at scales previously considered impossible. And it's been achievable since 1991. Dr. Blackwood built this technology 3 decades ago, but his work was suppressed before completion. She yielded the floor to Maya, who stood on legs that felt unstable, looking out at faces waiting for her to either validate or destroy Sarah's claims. Warren squeezed her hand briefly under the table. Silent support from someone who'd become family through shared purpose. Maya's voice came quieter than she'd intended, but carried in the acoustically designed space. I bought a house for $1 because I had nothing left to lose. I found Thomas Blackwood's journals and blueprints and components hidden throughout that house. With Warren Hayes' help, I completed what Dr. Blackwood started. The device works. It's real. And the only reason it's been buried for 30 years is because powerful interests wanted it dead. She pulled out Thomas's final journal, reading from the March 15, 1991 entry about Apex Energy's threats, about Martin Reeves's suspicious death, about choosing to hide revolutionary technology rather than let it be weaponized or suppressed. The room went silent except for her voice recounting paranoia that turned out to be prescient. A reporter shouted the first question. Are you accusing Apex Energy of corporate suppression? I'm presenting facts. Dr. Blackwood documented threats. Martin Reeves died under suspicious circumstances. Thomas disappeared. And 30 years later, Apex has surveilled me, harassed me, attempted to purchase the technology for burial, and explicitly threatened me when I refused to sell. Ellen stood, adding legal weight. We have evidence of coordinated harassment. Recording of Richard Vance making implicit threats against Ms. Chen's child. Documentation of the break-in attempt that led to criminal charges. This isn't speculation. This is pattern of behavior spanning 3 decades. Another reporter. What's your background, Ms. Chen? What qualifies you for this work? Maya felt the trap in the question. The suggestion that someone like her couldn't possibly achieve something legitimate scientists had missed. But she'd spent too many years being told she wasn't enough to let that define her now. I'm a single mom who works at a diner. I dropped out of engineering school when I got pregnant. I fled an abusive relationship with nothing but 2 suitcases and determination to give my son better life. She paused, meeting the camera lenses directly. You don't need a PhD to care about truth. You need to refuse to give up when everyone says you're wrong. Thomas Blackwood knew that. I learned it the hard way. And together across 30 years, we proved that sometimes the most broken things are exactly what we need to make us whole. The demonstration came next, the smaller prototype unit they'd built specifically for transport, activated live while scientists monitored readings that confirmed everything Sarah had claimed. Input 10 watts, output 127. Sustained and stable while the world watched. The room exploded with questions, but Maya barely heard them over the roaring in her ears. They'd done it, made it real, made it undeniable. Whatever happened next, this moment existed now, recorded and witnessed and spreading across every network that mattered. In the back of the auditorium, an elderly man stood slowly, raising his hand with the deliberate motion of someone whose body no longer obeyed completely. Security moved toward him, but something in his face made them hesitate. Ancient grief mixed with joy that looked almost painful in its intensity. My name is Dr. Thomas Richard Blackwood. His voice cracked but carried, decades of silence breaking in words that froze every person in the room. I'd like to see my device. The silence that followed felt like the moment between lightning and thunder, the space where everything changes but hasn't yet finished changing. Then chaos erupted, media surging forward while security tried to maintain order, and Sarah grabbed Amaya's arm with fingers that dug in hard enough to bruise. That's impossible. Blackwood's been dead for 30 years. But the man walking slowly toward the front table carried ID that security verified, carried documentation that proved identity beyond reasonable doubt, carried the face from photographs on the laboratory wall aged by 3 decades but unmistakably the same person. Thomas Blackwood, 87 years old, alive and emerging from hiding because the moment had finally arrived when the truth could survive exposure. He reached the table and stopped, looking at Maya with eyes that reflected wonder and gratitude and exhaustion from carrying secrets for longer than most people lived. You finished it. You actually finished it. Maya's voice came out barely above a whisper. You're alive. You've been alive this whole time. Alive and hiding since 1991. When Martin died, when Apex made clear they'd kill to protect their interests, I staged my disappearance and went underground with help from someone in the FBI who believed my story. Thomas's hands shook slightly as he gripped the table edge. I've been monitoring patent filings for 30 years, waiting for someone to find my work. When I saw your preliminary application 3 weeks ago, I knew it was time. Warren stood, extending his hand with military formality. Dr. Blackwood, we've been following your instructions, building what you designed. Thomas took the offered hand and something passed between them. Recognition of shared understanding, of completion across impossible gaps. You improved my frequency calibration. I was zero point 0.8 hertz off. You caught it. Your margin notes saved us. Good. That's why I left them. Thomas turned back to Maya, studying her face like memorizing something precious. Thomas Richard Blackwood, pleased to meet the woman who succeeded where I failed. The press conference had officially become history being made in real time. Thomas provided documentation he'd kept hidden for 3 decades. Evidence of Apex Energy systematically suppressing alternative energy technologies, purchasing patents specifically to prevent development, intimidating inventors through methods that range from financial pressure to implicit threats. Names of other researchers who disappeared or died suspiciously. Dates and details that painted picture of corporate malfeasance spanning back to the 1970s. I couldn't prove it alone, but now with your device working, with witnesses and public attention, Thomas's smile carried satisfaction that bordered on fierce. Now we can stop them. The FBI investigation opened within 72 hours. Federal agents arriving in Millbrook with warrants for Apex Energy records and questions for Richard Vance that he declined to answer without attorneys present. The corporate machinery that had operated smoothly for decades suddenly faced scrutiny it couldn't deflect or suppress. Stock prices plummeted. Board members resigned. Vance announced his departure to spend time with family while criminal charges were considered. But the real victory came in the months that followed. Other suppressed technologies emerging from filing cabinets and forgotten storage. Inventors coming forward with stories of harassment and intimidation. The systematic exposure of how profit motive had deliberately slowed human progress for generations. Green Tech Solutions approached Maya through channels that Ellen verified as legitimate, ethical renewable energy company that wanted to manufacture and distribute rather than bury. Their CEO met with Maya, Warren, and Thomas in the mansion's dining room, now furnished with chairs that matched and curtains that blocked the surveillance cameras that still occasionally appeared. The offer was straightforward. License the technology, maintain Maya's ownership and control, pay royalties on every unit produced, establish foundation in the Blackwood Hayes Chen names to support alternative energy research, and ensure no more inventors faced what Thomas had endured. $2.5 million up front. 3% royalties projected to generate millions annually. Legal protection and manufacturing expertise that would take the device from prototype to global production. Maya signed with Leo beside her, his hand in hers, Warren and Thomas witnessing the moment that transformed everything. The contract guaranteed not just financial security, but purpose. The foundation would fund researchers working on technologies that threatened established interests, providing protection and resources to prevent future suppression. This is for everyone who was told they were wrong, Maya said, pen poised over the signature line. Everyone who refused to stop believing even when the world demanded it. Time magazine's cover read, "The Dollar House That Changed Everything." The Nobel Committee announced in October, Blackwood, Chen, and Hayes received Physics Prize for revolutionary contributions to clean energy generation. Thomas wept openly at the notification, decades of vindication arriving all at once. Warren laughed and called himself the youngest laureate ever at 68. Maya stared at the formal letter and thought about the courthouse bulletin board, the dollar house that everyone had called cursed, the impossibility of any of this being real. But it was real. The device hummed in the basement. Orders came from 47 countries. Production facilities were being built. Energy companies were adapting or dying. Climate projections were improving as fossil fuel dependency decreased faster than the most optimistic models had predicted. 5 years after the initial discovery, Blackwood Hayes Chen devices powered 15% of American homes, with adoption accelerating globally. Fossil fuel emissions had dropped 40% faster than Paris Agreement targets. The foundation had funded 83 inventors working on technologies that established interests wanted buried. Maya served as CEO of GreenTech's research division. Warren led manufacturing quality control with the same exacting standards he'd brought to aerospace. And Thomas finally published 3 decades of research that universities would study for generations. The mansion remained their anchor, the place where impossible had become real, where desperation had transformed into revolution, where a single dollar and relentless determination had purchased future that looked nothing like the past. The deed stayed on Maya's wall, reminder that sometimes the most valuable things in life are the ones everyone else has abandoned as worthless. Late one evening, Maya found herself alone in the laboratory. The device hummed steadily, white light unchanged after 5 years of continuous operation. She thought about the courthouse, the eviction notice, the choice between her car and a cursed mansion. Thomas appeared in the doorway, moving slowly but steadily, drawn by the light they'd both built across 30 years and impossible odds. "Can't sleep either?" His voice carried the companionship of shared understanding. "Just thinking about how none of this should have worked. The odds against everything that had to happen exactly right." Thomas moved beside her. "That's why it had to be you, someone with nothing to lose and everything to fight for." They stood in comfortable silence, 2 people who'd saved each other across 30 years they'd never shared. Maya touched the device's copper coils, still warm after 5 years. This was never about building a machine. It was about refusing to let power dictate possibility. About believing one person with nothing could matter more than a corporation with everything. And she'd been right. The world was changing, one stubborn refusal at a time. For a dollar and a dream and the kind of determination that turned cursed houses into cradles of revolution.
Ist raus. Er geht nach hinten weg.
Ihr müsstet... Ja, ich komm grad nicht raus.
120 Männer. Damit das wieder.
Okay, wie wollen wir es spielen? Einer Seile? Der wird halt Mixot schmeißen, ne? Ich versuche hier an den Rand zu gehen irgendwo.
Boah, ich weiß auch nicht, wie hier ist.
Ist okay, beide da wahrscheinlich.
Ja, die kann Main. Die Jet kommt Main.
Ich glaube, ich habe die Fuse gehört.
Boah. Also, er hat mich halt hier hingehauen und dadurch hat die Jet mich irgendwie gesehen. Ich weiß es nicht.
Na, okay.
Das war unlucky. Ich konnte halt auch nicht sehen, aus welcher Richtung sie kommt.
Please stay alive. I hate making new friends.